most people are wary of introducing that into the public school system at large, especially on the high school and elementary school levels. The problem is a lot of the CRT thinking is being introduced into those arenas under very disingenuous auspices, and I say that specifically from a language standpoint.
All right, welcome back, everybody. So today we're starting this new process of videos, and it's more about, teaching me something on areas that I don't know as much about, and I have some great guests coming up. So today, what I noticed, there was a lot of conversation going on about critical race theory. And I realized I really don't know enough to bring you guys the facts. So I reached out to my friend. He is one half of the Wright brothers right here on Twitter or on YouTube, Mr. Trey Felder. Welcome to the channel.
Howdy. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. I was really glad you accepted to come on, because I think, like I said, this is just a big issue that we're talking about. And so everybody knows, we are talking about critical race theory. And I just don't really know enough about it at this point in time to have a full formed opinion on it. So that's why I have you on here. And I think you are more of an expert on it than me. So
if I'm the expert, we're playing fast and loose with that term these days. But, hey, that's America in 2021. But yeah, I mean, I would assume that most watching this broadcast are at least somewhat aware of the conversation around critical race theory, but maybe not so much about the nuance of it. And it's a divisive topic. If when you go to search for it, it is very, very difficult to find anything that is not heavily slanted one way or the other. Like you'll find one article that's for it, and one article that's heavily slanted against it. Very little out there that is just objectively, here are the facts, and let the reader make conclusions as they see fit. But I guess the first thing that I would touch on is that critical race theory, it's nothing really new. It's been around since I want to say the 80s, and the biggest portions of it is that, or the best way to think about it, from what I can gather, and from the way I've seen people on the right and the left speak about it, is it's a kind of repackaged Marxist ideology that focuses specifically on the legal ramifications of race. Mm-hmm. And I say Marxist because it always divides you into oppressor and oppressed. If you are a member of a quote unquote privileged group, which is a term I really hate using, but when in Rome, it's kind of one of those things where there is nothing that you can do to absolve yourself of that oppressor status, no matter if even the best laid intentions are intentionally, in many cases, misconstrued as just an extension of one's privilege, and unaware attempts to oppress the less privileged communities, etc. And then on the flip side, which is actually where I have a bigger problem, is the oppressed are always robbed of their own agency. And what I mean by that is there's this term in sociology, that word's used a lot in sociology, called the locus of control. You may have seen me use this term on Twitter every now and then. It's one of the few kind of brainiac phrases that stuck with me when I was in college. But basically what it means is there's two ways of looking at life. You can look at life as either having a internal locus of control, which is where you control your destiny, you have a tangible, lasting effect upon your surroundings, etc. Mm-hmm. Or you can have an external locus of control, which is to say that no matter what you do, there's always going to be outside forces that kind of win their way through your life, and you're basically just bobbing in a stream, hoping that the current takes you to a fortunate place. Of course, there's a a middle ground in there that is reality, but critical race theory tends to rely very heavily on convincing its practitioners that the external locus of control is in fact the way of the world. And when you are constructing a theory that's based on oppressor versus oppressed, if you have external locus of control basically serving as the axiomatic factor, then in effect, if you are in the oppressed category, then nothing that you can do is ever going to allow you to claim that agency back over your life. So that's why I have so much of a problem with it, because honestly, at this point, 2021, we've heard the white supremacy shtick, trope, narrative, whatever, spun this way and that until the cows come home. But
Yep.
Critical race theory is really one where it's one of the few theories out there that solidifies it, and because of the wording around it, which I'm sure we'll get into later, it's taken pretty deep root in academia at this point, and it's something that we're going to have to contend with from henceforth, at least in the near term.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point. So because right now we're seeing it starting to be pushed into elementary schools, high schools, and everything like that. And what we see a lot of it being advertised as is white people bad, Black people oppressed by white people. And like you said, it's almost like they're advertising it like because you are Black, you could never not be oppressed by the white person. And that's why you see leftists all the time sitting here going, I'm white, so I'm a racist, type thing. It doesn't matter. You can never change your stripes or anything like that, but here we are, transsexual woman, Black man having this conversation, right?
I love technology for this reason.
Absolutely. I mean, it's great because we can see just how much, how much race is a big issue in the country. We can obviously see that there are white supremacists in the country. I don't think it's as big as people make it out to be. And but going back to critical race theory now, is it true that it was like Black Lives Matter Inc. kind of created this? Well, they didn't create it, the theory, because you said it goes back a long time, but they kind of revamped it and they started pushing this to schools in order to end the oppression, right? This is kind of what and people know that Black Lives Matter Inc. is a Marxist organization. I mean, it lays this type of division out in the Communist Manifesto. But is that kind of where the origins have started to come back up, and why this has become such a big popular movement right now?
Yeah, well, honestly, and like I said, this goes back, critical race theory stuff goes back a ways, but you could say that about a lot of kind of harebrained ideas in academia. The problem arises when there's a societal vehicle of sorts at play that allows one particular theory, for whatever reason, to promulgate across the country in whatever form. The Black Lives Matter phenomenon, if you will, was just a right vehicle at the correct time in American, socio-political discussion, to kind of burst onto the scene and gain a ton of momentum before I think a lot of people really knew what it was. Think of it in many ways, how people were labeling this, that, and the other thing as alt-right, when not even people who were eventually castigated as alt-right even knew what that was supposed to mean.
Yeah.
Alt-right could have ranged from anything from being pro Second Amendment to sharing a Pepe meme. Like it was all.
I mean, anybody that's any part right is considered alt-right. I mean, even us libertarians get labeled as alt-right because we don't think that the government should be involved, and they want the government involved. And that even goes back to the systemic racism issues and stuff like that, and I've talked about that last year on the show. I had Wendy Bell on, and we talked about the real reasons behind systemic racism and everything like that, where it comes from democratic policies and, you know, teachers unions and public schooling and everything like that. So that's where a lot of that comes from. But and that's where they start pushing, no, you're alt-right if you don't believe that we should send more money to, you know, these communities and stuff like that to prop their systems up, even though they're the communities that are getting the most money anyways.
Exactly. Exactly. It's a never-ending cycle. You create
Yep.
the problem and promote the cure. But yeah, I mean,
That
to go
is
back
true.
the nascent, I guess, catching on of critical race theory probably owes most of its origins to the advent of Black Lives Matter, and then of course a political upheaval that came to a head. I want to say it was last year, maybe a little bit further back than that, when President Trump essentially banned critical race theory from being taught in any federal capacity.
Yeah.
And now what we're seeing are you know, these same fights playing out on the local levels and different jurisdictions that are not federally controlled. The issue that I'm finding now is not so much most sane people, and I say sane because there are plenty that aren't, but most sane people, when they hear kind of the core tenets of what critical race theory is truly about, i.e., you know, Marxism and external locus of control, perpetual oppressor-oppressed dynamic, etc. Most people are wary of introducing that into the public school system at large, especially on the high school and elementary school levels. The problem is a lot of the CRT thinking is being introduced into those arenas under very disingenuous auspices, and I say that specifically from a language standpoint. I distinctly remember, I want to say this was maybe a month and a half ago, where I was just standing in line checking out at a convenience store, and on the newspaper above the fold, big bold letters, was talking about how some Texas school district, quote unquote, rejects anti-racist teachings. It was a scathing headline just from the jump, and you knew going into it, it was made to evoke these feelings of the reader of horror, of, okay, why would you not want people to eschew racism? And that's how it's being couched. And in many ways, it's kind of it's appropriate that BLM is the vehicle for it in many ways, because in much the same way that BLM is tough to combat because the language is in effect unassailable, we all agree, again, same people everywhere, all agree that Black Lives Matter. But that doesn't mean that I have to support everything that BLM activists stand for.
Absolutely.
In the same way, we have the same dynamic going on with critical race theory, where it's not said necessarily that it is critical race theory, but it is couched in such a way as, we don't want our children to grow up with no knowledge of America's racist past. We don't want anti-racism to be excoriated in the schools, and it's just it's so duplicitous and sinister, because the minute that anyone speaks out against it, that label gets put out as, oh, you are a racist if you're white, and if you are a minority, then you are self-hating. You're they'll try to flip on you and try to make it seem like, oh, you have some sort of a Stockholm syndrome. And it's really weird.
Yeah, I get that in the LGBT community, so I completely understand what you're talking about there. It's the same. It's the leftist mantra, and I have that listed on here as well, because
Sorry for stealing thunder. I start.
No, go ahead. I'm glad you brought it up, because the name for that the left loves to use, and see, the media is complicit in pushing all of this stuff too, because they're in bed. They want those people, but they're also afraid of it's called a Khalifa trap. So a Khalifa trap is something. So BLM, Antifa, and other organizations like that, they name themselves Black Lives Matter or anti-fascist, so that when you say that you're against that organization, they say, what, you don't think that Black Lives Matter? And that's the trap, because then you can never disagree with them if they can push that. And so now with critical race theory, you're absolutely correct. It's just them pushing that same thing into schools, where if you're against teaching critical race theory, then you must be a white supremacist, or or a self-hating black man. It's absolutely, it's the MO of the left. And when you see it, when people actually get into it, they see it. But see, like you said, it's so divisive that the whole first page of Google is, why does the right hate black people? Because of this. So you can't really have this honest conversation about what really needs to be happening. I've seen it a few times on Twitter now, because there is this whole conscious black conservative movement on Twitter, kind of starting to push this stuff. Which I got in trouble last week because I called out one of the people that's been propped up, because she pleaded no contest to sleeping with a 16-year-old or a 16-year-old here in Georgia, and that when she was a teacher. So
I'm very aware of the person who you refer to. So yeah.
I was tired of seeing that person being the face of a movement, so I couldn't hold my tongue anymore.
Yeah, and I mean, this may be a little bit tangential too, but in the whole evolution of my brother and I being in this space, I'm half of the Wright brothers, but definitely the lesser half. He does way. He's also single, so I may play a part into it, but yeah, exactly. But it's something where I've been striving very hard on social media to try to stay away as much as possible from labels, because what I found is people will try to paint you into a corner with your label, and then no matter what you are arguing for or against, they'll just argue. They'll just trot out their talking points against that label, and you end up fighting battles that have nothing to do with the conversation at hand. And to me, I find that incredibly annoying. One, because as much as I enjoy arguing, my time is valuable. So I want an argument to at least be productive. But going back to your point about critical race theory, it is hard to even begin to discuss the points that critical race theory raises, because it is a very different play. It plays a lot differently to say I'm against critical race theory as opposed to, oh, I'm against teaching anti-racism in schools. And so you end up having an argument about the language before you even get to what the actual argument is supposed to be. So there's two ways to really that I found. Hopefully there's better ones out there, but there's two ways I found to kind of combat it. And the first is that I'm going to redefine the language right off the bat. If we cannot agree that no, I'm not a self-hating black man, or if it's another debate, say abortion or something, no, I do not hate women or something like that. If I'm going to get into it, I'm going to set those ground rules right off the bat. The second way to combat it, and it's a little bit more effective on social media just because people's attention spans are very very short, is to just treat it with the same incredibly ludicrous energy that you would if somebody tried to present to you flat earth theory being real. And so on some level, at some base level, we have to say, look, there is no debate here. I refuse to cite my sources on why the earth is not flat. No, if this is our impasse, I'm more than happy to have that impasse and not waste my time on it. It's not as effective for generating debate, but what I found is a lot of people who bring this out do so in bad faith. And one thing that I have learned in, I guess a decade plus on social media is that if someone is willing to start in bad faith, very, very rarely are they ever going to come back around to, okay, let's have a genteel, well thought out discussion on the merits of each of our arguments. So you kind of have to decide going in what kind of a discussion that you're going to have, because otherwise you'll end up frustrating yourself into thinking that you're going to be making a difference when you're really not.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, far too often nowadays we can't come together and actually find some common ground. We can't even see past the
Mm.
other person's, like you said, their labels,
Yep.
because people don't actually listen to what the other
Mm.
person says, or they don't actually read what the person says. They see one or two words, and then they see who you are and where your labels are, and they think they read everything into it.
Everything.
If I'm not 100% completely critical of Donald Trump, I am a Trumpist. I didn't vote,
Exactly.
even though I voted for Joe Jorgensen, I am a Trumpist
Mm-hmm.
because I don't hate Donald
Cut and
Trump.
dried MAGA.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a MAGA person, but I didn't think that he deserved all the criticism that he got. So if you defend him, you're a MAGA guy. You know, they lump
Exactly.
you all in just based on one interaction, not the whole body.
Mhm.
And you're right. I mean, like you said, if you're arguing in bad faith, then sometimes it's just better just to be like, okay, let's walk away because I'm
Yeah.
not changing your mind. At some point, you have to use the mute button and just walk away. You know?
No, you do, and that's actually a great point when it comes to debate, not just critical race theory, but any
Yeah,
debate subject.
absolutely.
There has to be a point at which you are willing to walk away, because first of all, you have to realize 99.9% of people are not going to change their mind based on an internet debate. They
Yep.
just aren't. And so when you take yourself out of the mode of I'm going to introduce point A, point B, point C, and they're going to see the error of their ways and repent. When you realize that's not going to happen,
Yep.
it changes how you discuss things online. And nowadays, when I get to debate with someone, I'm less arguing with them and more parrying for the sake of whoever might be viewing or passing by, whether they comment or not.
Exactly.
I don't care about comments, likes. I don't even know how many followers I have, to be honest.
Yeah.
On any social media platform, but I do want people to see maybe there's somebody out there that's on the fence that
Yep.
may be looking objectively at one side of an issue or another. And in my mind, if I can represent my points well, that's a feather in my cap. And maybe that person changes their mind down the road, that bystander. Maybe they
Yep.
don't, but I've given them something to think about. So, and when I'm in that mode, I can easily say, hey, you may have the last word here, and I'll walk away. And I won't. I'm the sort of person, I don't enjoy giving people the satisfaction of even muting or blocking them. So I'll see their little notification badge pop back up, and I'll just refresh it and keep scrolling past it. And that's something that I had to train myself to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, that's hard. That's really hard to do. That's why I have to use the mute button. I mean, I only have like 22 people blocked on Twitter. I guess I'm blocked by like 2,100 though. So
That's always weird to me, how you can get blocked by somebody who's never interacted with you before. I mean, it blows my mind how people can cut off sight unseen someone who they may or may not. Honestly, there's a handful of Twitter followers that I have right now, or mutual Twitter followers that I have right now. Our first interaction actually started in an argument where we were on opposing sides, and
yeah.
we ended up hashing it out, talking it out. Some of them ended up being actually more on the right side of the fence. Some of them are left side, but that type of give and take is what I kind of live for, and it may only happen one out of 1,000 times, but it's very worth it.
Yeah, I'm actually I'm the same as you. Like I said, I get into heavy talking points, but that's kind of how I have gained more people and have gained more people that I follow, because I see, like you said, when you can actually find somebody that you can have a discussion with and actually disagree with on something, but still have a discussion and not wind up throwing insults and stuff like that, then it's good. I would love to bring people that I disagree with on this channel. Actually, I had Taylor Leanne Chandler, who is more of a left leaning leaning person, on here, and we actually realized that we don't disagree on a whole lot. We just think a little bit differently in small areas, and that's where most people are. You have these two big divides that want the two centers to be thinking that they're on these far ends, when they're really not. They're not far away from each other.
Exactly. And it's not really that hard to figure out either.
Oh yeah, no, it's not. You're right. So that interaction that I had with that group, it was kind of talking about, they were bashing conservatives at this point, because they're saying conservatives use the term colorblind as a way to show that they don't they don't want to be seen as racist, so they say that they're colorblind. And I
Mhm.
think that the word colorblind gets misconstrued so much to mean that we don't actually see race. And it's kind of like the term pride when it comes to the LGBT community. People like
Mm,
conservatives see pride as
great
you're
analogy.
prideful of your sexuality, and that's not what it's about.
Right.
It's about being prideful of where we've come from and everything
Mhm.
like that, and being able to be who we are and being open and without oppression, right?
Mhm.
So colorblind simply means that I will not treat somebody different because of their race. It doesn't mean that I don't see race. And that was the whole minuscule detail that they were talking about when it came to critical race theory. It's like, how can you not believe in critical race theory if you don't see color? I'm like, that has nothing to do with what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's such a nitpick, and I actually was approaching that same terminology from a different angle a couple weeks ago on social media, and my point was that colorblind, obviously, if you look at it objectively, like you're saying, just you
Yeah,
treat people the same,
yeah,
no matter what color they are. That's obviously a positive message.
yeah,
I don't think
exactly.
any of us would disagree with that. We've allowed, and I say we, I'm talking about society. We've allowed the language to shift off center to the point where that's now used as a cudgel to beat people over the head with,
Yeah,
and I have a huge problem with that because my contention in my post was, where is it going to be 20, 30 years from now? Are we going to say that saying that you're inclusive is somehow not representative of being welcoming to people of all walks of life? It's really a slippery slope when we allow bad faith actors to have such control over the language etymology. I mean, that's how we end up with, we can't say colored people, but people of color is okay. Grammatically, that is
yeah,
the
yeah,
exact same thing. There is no difference whatsoever. And I'm a grammar nerd, as many people know. So it's like when I see that, it sets my teeth on edge because I, I'm like, wait a minute. If we just switch words, it's actually more efficient to say colored people. But if I say that, then you're the most racist person under the sun. We can have NAACP. Guess what the C stands for? But you
yeah,
know, it's existing alongside such a woke culture. So it creates these really weird ripples in the social paradigm that
yeah,
are not really healthy because we're allowing people to debate in bad faith.
yeah,
And when I hear somebody say that they're colorblind, I hear somebody say that they are striving to have equality in its truest form. That's all it is. That's all it
yeah,
should be. But if you are looking at it and saying, okay, this means that you just don't see color at all, and you try to take that literally and then use that
yeah,
absurdly literal definition to beat people around, it just
yeah.
doesn't make.
Yeah, because I think, I mean, the term, and that's this is the thing that, I mean, leftists and people that argue in bad faith always like to change the meaning of words when it fits their narrative, right? And that's what we've seen a lot happening right now. But most people that say that are just trying to listen to what Martin Luther King said in his "I Have a Dream" speech. That
Mhm.
whole speech was about not seeing color, right? I mean,
Exactly.
so
Exactly.
I think that's where that comes from, and I think that's where we
Well, what
can't
you
let
read,
people change the narrative, right? We can't let people change the
it's
meaning.
about power, and
Yeah,
it's about controlling those who you feel should be behaving in a way differently than they are currently. That's really all it's about.
yeah,
And some people really are all about equality, and I applaud them for it. I commend them for it. But in many ways, especially when you have grassroots efforts that get nationalized, um, there's a lot of people that glom onto the kernel of something that was actually pure and wholesome, and transmuted into something that really is only self-serving for their own
yeah.
goals. And when I see that happen with language, especially, it really does irk me
Oh
because
yeah,
it's not like we said earlier in the show. You end up having an argument about the language that's being used, and
yeah,
that can span much more of the discussion than, okay, what are our actual point by point differences and
yeah,
agreements. And like you said, if more people were able to get to that level of discussion, they
Yeah.
probably find they're not as far apart, like you and like you were saying. But we rarely get there because it's not sexy, it's not clickbaity, and next thing you know, we're sitting here debating the superfluous.
Yeah, and I think I mean, it's perfect example too, and it really started to rear its head a lot was in the Trump era, right? Under his administration, people didn't actually listen to what he said. Like,
Right.
perfect example is people even still claiming that he told people to inject bleach, when if you actually clearly look and watch the video, he said he was spitballing, like, can we get something like that cleans the inside of the body like that, using it as an analogy.
He was asking a question, if I remember.
Yeah, he was asking it of his top scientist. The top scientist was like,
Yeah.
and he was like, we talked about like using UV, like, because it kills it instantly. Like, can we get something like that goes in the body, like UV or like disinfectant that goes in and like cleans it all up? Like, and then it got so spun.
It's an interesting way that Trump was covered, and I'm actually, I mean, I voted for Trump both times. Obviously, I'm disappointed he didn't win the second term, but I think it's interesting to see, now that there is a new administration in office, the disparity in coverage between what was said and then the way it was covered. Like you mentioned, talking about the inject bleach thing. I actually think it goes back even further to when he was talking about the border wall.
Oh yeah.
He said that they aren't sending their best and they're sending rapists and etc. Those were not. If you listen to this full quote in context, those were not his words. He was paraphrasing what he was saying. He was being told by border officials.
Yeah.
And that's a whole different ballgame than just some random guy coming down to the border and just shooting off at the mouth. But of course, it got covered a whole lot differently than it actually went down. So
I mean, and then him calling MS-13 animals, and they misconstrued it as he called Mexicans that, and it was just one thing after another, and
that's not to say that he didn't have gaffes. Like he misspoke all the time, and in many cases I had no problem taking him to task for it, but it would happen where it didn't matter what he said, pro or con, even if it was just a fairly benign point that was being raised, it was always read or spun the worst possible way, and that's we're not seeing that happen as much now. So it shows you how much the media is complicit in that language.
Oh no, they don't. They were silent when the president said something about a 13 or what is it, 9-year-old girl the other day. So I don't know,
oh yeah, I heard about that. That was creepy.
It really was. It's like, I felt, during the Trump era, it was one of those times where you're sitting here you're talking language, that was the argument. That's what we were talking about before, was that's the argument. It's not about, the actual issues. It's how they misconstrued what he said. And if you can't like get to an equal footing to understand the basic thing that he said, you're not going to go anywhere past that, because then you can't even agree on the basics, right?
Yeah. Exactly. It's an unfortunate impasse that really it's an impediment to any reasonable discourse. Especially when to bring it back to our topic at hand, when we're talking about critical race theory. It's so important to not just say why you're for or why you're against critical race theory tenets, but also be able to codify why. And I find it extremely insidious that such a harebrained theory could have taken hold in this day and age. If you look at any sort of trends or statistics, whether you're talking immigration, whether you're talking the rates of marriage or just couples in general, there's more prolific race mixing than ever before. I mean, my own family is an example of that. This month will make 10 years married to my wife. We have 2 mixed kids, and it's just as you see so much more of that just in our own community and across the country, it makes you question why there's this extreme push push these polarizing topics into education. It really makes you wonder where it's all coming from, because it's not something that, if we allowed it to proceed naturally and didn't make everything so hyper focused on race, eventually it becomes a point where you can't really tell who's pure this, who's full that, and it shouldn't even matter to begin with. So it's interesting to see. I want to see where this goes from here.
Well, yeah, and because I remember growing up when it was like, they would be saying the conversation was mostly about, at some point in however many years, like they had a year based on it, is America would have its own race. It wouldn't be this melting pot because we all melted together. But I think most families at least have multiple race family members that have married outside of their races. And that's kind of like you said, it's as things are growing more, how are these wild harebrained ideas being pushed out? And you see this everywhere. I mean, it's happening in the South, it's happening in the North, it's happening all over. So how do these types of things take hold? And I think it's exactly what we talked about earlier when we're talking about the media pushing narratives that aren't true. And that's the only way that they can actually push these narratives, is to create these clickbaity headlines to where all you're talking about is what the headline said, because nobody actually reads the articles. I mean, Twitter, I think, got rid of their I actually think they got rid of the notification that said, do you really want to retweet this? Because they did that for like 2 months, and then they're like, oh no, we gotta get rid of this.
Yeah, that was getting really annoying, especially for somebody like me. I almost always read the article, or at least click it and skim through, because there's so much clickbait out there where the actual core of the article is buried 3 or 4 or 5 paragraphs down, or maybe the content of the article is in no way reflective of the headline. I got a couple of times, and like, I'm tired of just falling for whatever clickbaity headline.
I've done that too, where you just see the headline and you're like, oh, I'm like, wait a second. And it's kind of the same thing as wait and see. Like when people jump the gun when it comes to anything that happens in culture, it's like, can we at least wait and see what happens until we like make a judgment on this? No, we have to have judgments now.
Yeah, it's almost seen as a sign of weakness if you either A, don't have an opinion, or B, know of an incident but are waiting for something else to come out. It's almost like you don't know what you're talking about. It's just like, no, I wasn't there. I don't know.
Well, and then when things do come out, it's either it fits the narrative and they keep pushing, or sometimes it doesn't fit the narrative, but they keep pushing the narrative, like the Kyle Rittenhouse stuff, like that didn't fit the narrative, but they kept pushing it and people still believe,
Yeah. And it's confirmation bias on a macro level, really. And if when an incident occurs, and I mean, we're all probably guilty of this in some way, shape, or form, but my goal is, whenever an incident occurs, I'm not just jumping to whatever ideological corner I favor and then molding whatever facts come out into that worldview. I try to look at it and try to be as objective as I can. I know where my biases are. That's fine, but that doesn't mean that those biases have to inform your opinion on every new incident that arises.
Yeah, and you have to constantly work on that too, because it is. I mean, I'm the same way. As I try to get as much information as possible before doing that, and trying not to let your biases jump in early on. And sometimes I catch myself doing it as well. So I mean, we all do it, and so we have. I mean, society has to get better at this stuff, but I don't think most people are looking at it the same way as like we are, and saying, you know what, I realize I'm biased on this issue. Most people don't even want to look at their you said it before, they don't want to look at their own biases, And
I think what's really going to end up being the final cost of all of this is we're bringing up a generation of people who are coming of voting age, and all that they've known is this hyper polarized way of doing things, and it spans more than just the Trump era. It spans more than just the Obama era. It's kind of just this gradual ramping up of all the sliders that we've seen over the past 10, 15 years. So now you have teenagers that they don't know what real political negotiation looks like. You
No.
think compromise, they think of compromise as some sort of capitulation, like if you have to compromise the other side one. No, compromise is supposed to be neither side's getting exactly what they want, but
Exactly.
we have this whole all or nothing zero sum game version of politics going on right now, and it's really going to harm us going forward because what sort of people are going to be putting on future tickets. So people who think that the only way to get ahead is to do things that the way that our predecessors did, and the way they did is you jump to your corners and you beat each other to death with the static.
Yeah. So at this point in time, though, it's like any politician that says they want unity is lying through their teeth. They want unity as long as you agree with them. And unity for Republicans and Democrats doesn't get the job done because it doesn't get votes. They want both sides want cults. They want these cult followings that no matter what you do, you can do no wrong. And then there's the people like us who are kind of in the middle, and we can look objectively at both sides, but it's like then you get cast out by both sides too. So you're kind of in the middle, and nobody likes anybody that's in the middle,
Exactly. And it's the extremes have come to the point where they're pushing more and more people into that middle ground that nobody really wants to inhabit. But it's the only place that you can really be objective ideologically. And a prime example of that is the COVID response. In bygone eras, I think that actually would have been the way that COVID came to our shores would have been a galvanizing force against a rival superpower in the Chinese government, saying, "Hey, this came from y'all. This is communism, an attack of communism. Let's drop our differences on domestic shores and fight against this external threat." But no, what we saw was every politician managed to find some way to put their own spin on it. Absolutely. We ended up fighting more amongst ourselves about what COVID is, and how we should call it. What should we wear a mask? Should we mandate this and that and the other thing? Next thing you know, we managed to turn an external threat or a threat that originated from abroad, and we managed to turn that into a domestic political football of sorts. And it really is a microcosm of where, like you said, politicians' minds are at now. It's a self-serving profession, but even more so now when you can take something on that big a scale and turn it into a domestic football issue as opposed to looking at the bigger picture.
Absolutely. Well, okay, so the last thing I think we need to talk about with critical race theory, though, is what is the solution? Because I've seen ban critical race theory, which is what a lot of people on the right are pushing for. And then I actually kind of agree with that group we talked about earlier, where they're talking about you can't ban something because it will just turn into something else. You have to fight it on ideas. And so what do you counter critical race theory with? What do you counter critical race theory with, I guess, is the question.
And it's a tough answer, because we all know that academia is extremely far to the left. So I don't think, federal level notwithstanding, I don't think there's really a way to stop it in its tracks at this point. We're too far down the track of it's at the forefront of everybody's consciousness, and those on that left side of the aisle who were going to be predisposed to agree with it anyway are going to find some way to work it into their curriculum. So one, you have to fight on the micro level. In different communities would be like, hey, we're not about critical race theory. But then the combat to that is you have to offer an alternative. You have to offer, hey, here's a study of critical race theory. Here's a study of the anti-racism push, and don't even put it out there as directly rebutting critical race theory, because that's going to be just as hard to introduce as critical race theory has been in many communities. But if you're going to allow people to do a deep dive into it, like I said, I think most people are not going to be in agreement with it, especially when they realize that it's perpetual racial struggle that cannot be sustained if our current racial trends continue.
Yeah.
So it's not something that is going to be able to stand on its own 2 feet for very long, but you have to give people tools to deconstruct it, and that's really the only way. I feel for the people going through public education systems. I did not go through it. I was homeschooled until I went up to Texas A&M for college. So my mom had full control over the curriculum. She brought in external influences, but was also encouraging us to do our own research and onto different topics. So we weren't just getting, the canned story from somewhere, which is what critical race theory is going to be for the vast majority of people. So I think you rage as hard against it as you can, from a rhetoric standpoint, but then from a practical standpoint, that if there's no alternative introduced, it's going to find its way into the bread and butter curriculum sooner or later.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think that is why it's dangerous anytime you do this, because again, the left are masters at quite a few things, and when they start, and Marxists love to do this because they know that even if they don't get critical race theory, whatever you use as an alternate is still going to be further left than what you actually want to put into your curriculum. So that's the constantly moving left of the country that we see. That's how they've done it for years and years and years with everything that they've done. So
it's going to be interesting dynamic. It's going to be an interesting fight. There are times when that's appropriate, I think, and I would hold up LGBT rights and cause as probably a prime example of that, appropriate, given that it's June. But it's just you can say what you will for or against the community, but there has been a net positive, and I think that is an important feather in the cap for people to understand. But that can also swing the other way when it comes to issues like critical race theory, where it's a net negative. So you don't want the pendulum swing to be so far to the left, but then when it comes back, it doesn't come all the way back. So we want to make sure that you're not just trying to hold it in place, but also try to push it back into the direction of not just common sense, but respect for your fellow man on the basis of race, which is just what critical race theory does not do.
Exactly. I think that's a good point as well. Like we have to get it so the pendulum's not swinging, and the key to that is exactly what you said. It's just having common decency and seeing everybody else respectfully, and it's not just race, it's everything. It's across all culture. And but right now, the left seems to hold the cultural narrative, and that's the hard push, is to get people to realize. And I think that the right actually made a lot of headway in the last election, with the walk away movement, did tremendous things. And now actually they're trying to push those same people out of the Republican Party that were helping them, like the only category that Donald Trump did not gain voters in, like a percentage of voters, is straight white men. The only category that he did not have higher percentage of voters. So that should tell you where the left is, where Democrats are and where their priorities really are. They gain more in the people that they're telling are their oppressors, right?
Yes. It's fascinating. That's the true stock syndrome, if you ask me. But
absolutely, I agree.
A whole other conversation.
Yeah, there's a lot of different conversations that we could go off from there.
Yeah. Sure, for sure. Next time.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I will definitely have you on again. We'll talk all these issues some other time, and anytime you want to come on, you are more than welcome to come on. So yeah, I guess that's it. Thank you for coming on. Enjoyed it. Like, subscribe to the channel. Got a lot of big things coming up. Got quite a few good interviews. And also go and find Trey. Where can you find you at?
A lot of different places on social media. You probably know my brother Damani more than me. I'm on Twitter at tbirdtrey_10. It's Trey with a 3, not an E. I'm also on YouTube with Damani, with our YouTube channel, The Wright Brothers. If you search for it, it's going to pull up some other brothers, Wilbur and Orville. They did something or other with a plane, I think. But you're probably going to have to fix that autocorrect from WRIGHT to RIGHT, but we're out there as well. Lots of varied content on our channels, and we also are on Facebook. He's on TikTok, but if you're looking for me specifically, I'm probably hanging out on Twitter, cussing in Spanish for some weird reason. So that's my.
I'll put those links in the description as well. So thanks again.
Absolutely. Thanks, and giggle.